Air pollution is a worldwide problem that affects the health of millions of people. The most damaging air pollutant is called particulate matter, or PM, which consists of tiny particles invisible to the human eye that can be breathed in and travel down to the lungs. Exposure to these particles can aggravate asthma and cause other respiratory problems. Latest estimates from the World Health Organization indicate that particulate pollution is responsible for reducing the average lifetime in Europe by 9 months, and that in Ireland alone, more than 1,000 lives are lost every year as a result of direct exposure to particles in the air. Reducing the emissions of particles will lead to clear improvements in health and the environment. In Ireland, the main sources of particulate matter are vehicle exhausts and the burning of solid fuels, such as coal, peat and wood in the home. Over the last 25 years, large improvements in air quality have been observed in the main urban areas of Ireland. The key factors responsible for this improvement are reduced vehicle emissions, greater use of gas for home heating, and the ban on burning of bituminous or smoky coal. However, gas is not available nationwide, and the ban on bituminous coal has only been implemented in the main cities and larger towns. As a result, many small towns across the country still have high levels of solid fuel burning and particulate pollution. The Centre for Research into Atmospheric Chemistry at UCC is helping to address this issue by undertaking a research project called Sapphire, which is aimed at measuring and identifying the sources of particulate pollution in small towns. Funded by the Irish Environmental Protection Agency, the Sapphire Project involves the deployment of a large range of instruments in residential areas of small towns to measure the amount, size and chemical content of ambient particles. Advanced chemical fingerprinting techniques and source apportionment analysis are used to separate and quantify the contributions from the burning of coal, peat and wood, as well as vehicle emissions and other sources. To date, field measurements have taken place in 2 small towns, Killarney, County Kerry and Enniscorthy, County Wexford. These locations are typical of many small towns across Ireland, in that they are not covered by the ban on smoky coal and they are not on the national gas grid. As a result, solid fuel burning is therefore a major source of home heating. The following short film was made during our measurement campaign in Enniscorthy, February 2015.
I'm John Wenger. I'm from the Centre for Research into Atmospheric Chemistry at UCC. We are currently performing a EPA-funded research project called Sapphire, which is aimed at finding the sources of particles in the atmosphere. Atmospheric particles smaller than 10 microns are actually invisible to the human eye, but they can be breathed into the lungs and they can cause significant health effects. They can aggravate asthma and cause other respiratory problems. In fact, the World Health Organization has estimated that the average life expectancy of a person in Europe is reduced by 9 months following exposure to air pollution. And there are many organisations across the country, like the Asthma Society for Ireland, that are advocating measures to be put in place to reduce particle emissions. In order to reduce particle emissions, we need to identify their sources. How can we do this? Well, we rely on the fact that particles from different sources contain different chemicals. So, for example, sea spray particles contain sodium chloride. Wood-burning particles contain potassium and carbon. The goal of the Sapphire Project is to deploy these instruments at specially selected locations around Ireland so we can identify the particles, look at the chemical composition and then assign them to sources. Particles come from a variety of sources. They can be natural, they can be man-made sources. So, for example, natural sources include sea salt, sea spray, volcanoes even, but man-made sources are typically things like vehicle exhausts, wood burning, coal burning, etc. We want to go to representative locations that potentially have air quality issues. So, for example, large cities might have issues with vehicle exhaust emissions. So, and small towns might have problems with fuel burning, especially during winter months. So we would try to select locations where we could have contrasting environments, where we could get interesting results that really could be used to help identify sources that could feed into future policy decisions down the line. This research project is funded by the Irish EPA and they're charged with the responsibility of overseeing environmental research in Ireland. Air quality falls under their remit, and so they're very interested in identifying sources of particles. Any information that we find could be presented in policy briefs, for example, to the Department of the Environment. So there is a relevance for the Department of Environment too. Local authorities that have responsibility for making air quality measurements, they're also interested in what we do, as well as many organisations around the country that might be interested in human health. For example, the Asthma Society of Ireland are very interested in bringing forward measures that could reduce air pollution, and therefore that would reduce the burden on asthma sufferers. We are currently here in Enniscorthy, County Wexford. It's a town that is not in the smoky coal ban zone, so there is high incidence of solid fuel burning. There's no natural gas, and the topography of the area is interesting because it's set in a valley, so that there's little dispersion of pollutants. So this is a small town where there's solid fuel burning with an air pollution problem, so it's a perfect place for us to come and visit. We've already measured significant amounts of particles that are from coal and wood burning, so we can already tell that coal and wood burning are major sources of pollution in Enniscorthy. What we need to do is, when we finish up the campaign, is we take all the data. We spend months analysing the data. We will also do some offline chemical analysis to look at filters that we've collected. All this data will help us in a source apportionment modelling exercise, which will be used to quantify the individual sources. And so this is the scientifically robust method for doing that, for identifying and quantifying the sources. Poor air quality is a worldwide problem. In Europe, the main sources of air pollution for particles are really traffic and fuel burning. And fuel burning is on the increase. It's becoming more fashionable to burn wood at home, especially on mainland Europe and in the UK also, and in Ireland. So there are regularly measurements taking place in all the different countries, not just researchers but also agencies, national environment agencies will be making these measurements in cities and in towns to answer questions like what we're trying to do. How much pollution comes from cars? How much pollution comes from fuel burning? The Department of Chemistry at UCC has a range of research activities. Our particular area in the crack lab is atmospheric chemistry. We perform field and laboratory measurements of atmospheric processes. In the field, we measure composition of particles. We look at biological particles, chemical particles, so issues related to air quality, issues related to pollen. We also do some work in the lab where we use simulation chambers to study chemical processes that give rise to pollution, like smog. And so we have a range of programs that are funded by Science Foundation Ireland, the EPA, European Commission, to tackle a whole range of problems. We do some fundamental studies, and we also do some very applied work, for example the field work of the Sapphire Project.